Imagine a quiet neighborhood, a pristine home, and a proud homeowner. Then, an arrogant decision. A single, unauthorized cut, and the unimaginable unfolds. A towering sentinel of green, severed from its life source, doesn't fall as expected. Instead, it turns, a silent, slow-motion act of retribution, straight towards the one who dared to challenge its roots. You won't believe the catastrophic consequence and the jaw-dropping twist of justice that follows. Don't miss what happens next. A story of hubris, property, and poetic irony. In the meticulously cultivated tableau of Willow Creek, a suburban sanctuary where every blade of grass seemed to stand at attention and every dwelling bespoke a quiet affluence. An unspoken pact of neighborly civility served as the bedrock of its tranquility. This delicate balance, however, was about to be obliterated with a single, audacious act of hubris. Karen Dobson, the self-appointed high priestess of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, brandished her title not merely as a designation, but as a divine mandate. Her very presence, impeccably coiffed blonde hair pulled into a severe bun, her tailored blazers perfectly accentuating her rigid posture even on a casual Tuesday, broadcast her unwavering conviction that she, and she alone, possessed the unerring vision for the neighborhood's ideal aesthetic. Her gaze, a perpetual, critical appraisal, scanned every detail, the precise angle of a mailbox, the uniform shade of a front door, but her keenest, most relentless focus invariably landed upon the arboreal. In Karen's meticulously ordered universe, trees were either symbols of controlled, aesthetic perfection or, more often, grotesque, unruly deviations from her prescribed beauty. Looming large on Karen's mental blacklist of community imperfections was a venerable, majestic oak, its ancient branches, gnarled and powerful, stretching with quiet dignity across the property line of Tom Wheeler. Tom, a water engineer by trade, embodied a stoic calm, a man whose life mirrored the steady, unwavering flow of the rivers he helped manage. He had inhabited his humble, yet inviting, home for well over 2 decades, and the oak, with its sprawling, dense canopy casting a generous, dappled shade over a significant portion of his yard, was far more than mere landscaping. It was an integral thread in the tapestry of his daily existence. It was a bustling metropolis for chattering squirrels, a vast natural umbrella against the relentless summer sun, and a profound, living testament to resilience in a world perpetually rushing towards change. Tom tended to it not with casual maintenance, but with an almost sacred reverence, his calloused hands carefully pruning away dead limbs, his gaze often lingering on its immense trunk, ensuring its vibrant, unyielding health. For Tom, this magnificent sentinel was not simply an asset on a deed. It was a loyal, aged companion, an enduring spirit intertwined with the very soul of his home. Its deep roots, he felt, mirrored his own, anchoring him to this quiet corner of the world. But to Karen, the oak was an existential threat to her carefully curated utopia. It simply did not conform to her rigid blueprint for a neighborhood devoid of natural imperfection, where every shrub was uniformly clipped, every bush so precisely identical as to drain it of all individual character. "It's monstrous," Karen muttered, her voice a low, venomous hiss, her eyes, cold as Arctic ice, sweeping over the majestic tree from the pristine, gleaming window of her living room. "It suffocates the light. Its wretched leaves constantly fall into our pristine yard. And honestly, it just looks wild, a stain on the landscape." She had broached the subject with Tom on numerous occasions, her words ostensibly polite, yet laced with an undeniable undercurrent of demand, hinting at drastic shaping or significant reduction. But Tom, with his characteristic quiet resolve, had always politely yet firmly refused. He explained the tree's robust health, its complete lack of hazard, and his profound, unshakable affection for it. Karen, However, with her ingrained inability to accept anything but absolute compliance, had interpreted his gentle refusal as an act of brazen insubordination, a direct, personal affront to her unchallenged authority. Karen's colossal hubris knew no bounds, nor did it permit any form of dissent. As the esteemed HOA president, she clung fiercely to the conviction that she possessed the absolute, unchallengeable right to dictate every aesthetic detail within the community, even extending her dominion to the private property of her unsuspecting neighbors. During the occasionally fraught HOA meetings, Karen was a master manipulator, deftly steering agendas, ensuring that every resolution, every minor decision, invariably bent to the will of her personal aesthetic preferences and perceived interests. She styled herself the uncompromising, tireless guardian of neighborhood aesthetics, a phrase she deployed with the chilling precision of a scalpel, using it as an all-purpose justification for enacting her whims without any genuine consensus or even a pretense of democratic process. Then came the fateful dawn. Tom, adhering to his usual routine, departed for his work as a water engineer. His profession, demanding meticulous precision and unwavering adherence to established protocols, had instilled in him a deep-seated belief in order, in process, in the inherent reliability of rules. He believed, perhaps naively, that others operated under the same moral and procedural principles. He left his home cloaked in its habitual morning stillness, utterly oblivious to the insidious, long-simmering scheme that Karen had been meticulously concocting, a scheme that would irrevocably transform his ordinary day into a visceral, bewildering nightmare, without a whisper of a warning to Tom, or indeed any official consultation with the HOA board. Karen had secretly contacted a local tree service. She had spun a tangled web of deceit, claiming that Tom's magnificent oak demanded extreme pruning and the immediate removal of several major limbs because it supposedly posed an imminent threat to public safety, a bald-faced lie. A transparent fabrication she brazenly employed to legitimize her outrageous overreach. She even went so far as to emphatically assure the company that Tom had granted his unequivocal consent, demanding that they commence the destructive work immediately. Her objective was chillingly clear: the irreversible act must be consummated, irrevocably, before Tom's return, leaving him facing a fait accompli, stripped of all power to intervene. The tree service crew arrived, their utilitarian green uniforms a jarring dissonance against the vibrant, living backdrop they were poised to violate. Their massive equipment, ominous and rumbling, settled into position. They were professionals, undeniably, but they were also pragmatists, not moral arbiters or forensic investigators. Their mandate was to cut trees, and that was precisely the task they were prepared to execute. As they methodically began to erect their scaffolding and power up their deafening chainsaws, a ripple of quiet apprehension, then outright alarm, spread through the neighborhood. Several discerning neighbors, acutely aware of Tom's almost familial bond with his grand oak, instinctively knew something was gravely amiss. The notion of Tom willingly sanctioning such a brutal assault on his beloved tree was simply unthinkable. A few, guided by a prickle of intuition, a vague sense of impending injustice, instinctively raised their cell phones, beginning to record the unfolding drama. Those nascent video recordings, at that unforeseen moment, were merely curious snippets, yet they would soon transform into irrefutable, damning evidence in a dramatic, inevitable confrontation. They captured the workers, grim-faced, ascending the ancient trunk, positioning themselves for the first, catastrophic cut. The chainsaw's guttural roar, a mechanical shriek of aggression, savagely tore through the morning's once serene tranquility, an ominous, piercing prelude to the unfolding disaster. Meanwhile, Karen stood triumphant at her polished living room window, a smug, self-satisfied smile gracing her lips. Finally, she was getting her way. Her neighborhood, her carefully curated domain, would soon ascend to a higher plane of perfection, according to her exacting, unyielding standards. She gave no thought whatsoever to the profound consequences, no consideration to the quiet anguish she was inflicting upon Tom, nor even the slightest inkling of the catastrophic, unforeseen risks inherent in so carelessly tampering with such a formidable natural structure. Her unbridled arrogance had utterly blinded her, transforming her into a woman oblivious to the impending, utterly unforeseen cataclysm. She saw only an unsightly oak about to be domesticated, pruned into submission, and she reveled in the profound, almost carnal satisfaction of anticipating a future free of fallen leaves in her meticulously groomed yard. The chainsaw continued its ear-splitting scream, and the very atmosphere of the neighborhood began to palpably thicken, a tangible sense of growing tension, an insidious dread seeping into every manicured lawn and hushed home, a chilling harbinger of the unimaginable disaster poised to erupt. The relentless, grating growl of the chainsaw escalated, no longer a mere mechanical hum, but a predatory shriek echoing through the once serene suburban air. High above, suspended precariously in the ancient oak's vast crown, the tree service workers, their faces grim under their safety helmets, began their destructive task. The first thick limb, a behemoth of wood and foliage, was expertly notched. There was a brief, agonizing pause, a collective holding of breath from the few curious neighbors who had gathered, their phone cameras poised. Then, with a sudden, sickening crack that resonated deep in the chest, the mighty branch groaned, twisted, and plummeted to the ground with a resounding thud that shook the very earth, sending a shower of leaves and splinters into the manicured lawn. Karen, watching from her window, clapped her hands together in a small, triumphant gesture, oblivious to the subtle shift in the tree's colossal balance. To her, it was simply progress, the removal of an unsightly obstruction. The crew continued their work, systematically stripping the oak of its impressive limbs. Each falling branch, though carefully guided, subtly altered the distribution of weight, an invisible, dangerous dance of physics playing out overhead. The tree, so long a steadfast monument, began to complain, its mighty trunk creaking and groaning with an audible strain that sent shivers down the spines of the onlookers. A heavy tension settled over Willow Creek. This was no ordinary pruning. This was an assault. The initial casual curiosity of the neighbors morphed into genuine concern, then into a burgeoning dread. They exchanged uneasy glances, their hushed whispers carrying the collective premonition of disaster. "That doesn't look right," one whispered, her eyes wide, capturing every tremor of the trunk on her phone. "It's leaning more than it should." Another, a retired structural engineer, murmured about altered center of gravity and unforeseen stresses, his brow furrowed with professional alarm. Meanwhile, a few blocks away, Tom Wheeler was navigating the usual afternoon traffic, his mind still on a complex irrigation system design. He was a man of routines, of predictable paths, and his quiet drive home was usually a peaceful transition from the rigors of work to the calm of his personal sanctuary. He had no inkling of the seismic shift occurring in his world. He pictured his oak, solid and unwavering, providing shade, a silent sentinel in his yard. This tranquil image was about to be obliterated by a reality far more chaotic and dramatic than any fictional construct. Back at the scene, the tree service foreman, a man named Gary with years of experience etched onto his weathered face, began to feel a gnawing unease. The tree was behaving strangely. After several large branches on Tom's side had been removed, the majestic trunk, now significantly lighter on one flank, began to list, ever so slightly, but noticeably. Gary looked up, his professional eye calculating the shifting weight, the immense forces at play. His gut clenched. "Hold on," he yelled up to his crew, his voice strained. "Something's off. It's pulling too much." He saw the direction of the lean, and his heart leaped into his throat. It wasn't leaning towards Tom's property, which would have been the natural, less destructive fall if the tree had been compromised on Tom's side. It was leaning away from Tom's side, towards Karen's immaculate, albeit now overshadowed, house, The removal of the heavy branches on Tom's side had destabilized the tree's inherent balance, creating an unexpected catastrophic pendulum effect. Karen, still basking in her self-satisfied glow, noticed the increased urgency in the workers' voices, but dismissed it as standard operational chatter. She was already mentally planning the new, smaller ornamental tree she would plant, something appropriate for the neighborhood's aesthetic. She imagined the sparkling sunlight pouring into her living room, unimpeded by that behemoth. Then came the crescendo, with a final, agonizing groan that sounded like the tortured cry of a dying leviathan. The colossal oak, now fatally unbalanced, began its irreversible descent. It wasn't a quick, clean fall. It was a slow-motion catastrophe, a deliberate, ponderous tilt that seemed to defy gravity for agonizing seconds. The roots, no longer able to anchor the immense, shifting weight, groaned and ripped from the earth with a sound like thunder, tearing up huge chunks of Tom's carefully tended lawn. The ground trembled violently. Dust, leaves, and splinters erupted into the air like a grotesque fireworks display. The neighbors gasped, some screaming, their phone cameras shaking wildly as they tried to capture the impossible. The tree did not fall sideways. It did not fall towards Tom's yard, with a terrifying, majestic inevitability. The immense trunk, now a weaponized pendulum, swung with devastating force, directly into the gleaming, untouched roof of Karen Dobson's house. The impact was cataclysmic, a deafening crack, a sickening crunch of splintering wood and shattering tiles, tore through the quiet afternoon. The perfectly proportioned roof of Karen's house simply collapsed inward, a gaping maw of destruction where elegant shingles and sturdy beams once stood. The ancient oak's massive crown, laden with its remaining foliage, smashed through the upper story, its branches penetrating rooms, tearing down curtains, crushing furniture. Debris wood, plasterboard, insulation exploded outwards in a cloud of dust. The pristine facade of Karen's house was now utterly ruined, a grotesque caricature of its former grandeur, impaled by the very tree she had so carelessly condemned. Silence, thick and absolute, descended for a stunned beat. Then, screams. Karen Dobson's triumphant smile dissolved into a mask of pure horror. She stood frozen at her shattered window, her perfectly made-up face contorted in disbelief, her body trembling uncontrollably. Her meticulously arranged living room was now open to the sky, sunlight pouring through a gaping hole where her ceiling once was. Illuminating the devastation, she saw the gaping maw of the tree, its rough bark scraping against her expensive wallpaper, its splintered branches protruding into her once sacred space. Her husband, attracted by the earth-shattering noise, rushed in, his face a picture of utter bewilderment, his mouth agape. The tree service crew, utterly stunned and visibly shaken, stared at the disaster they had unwittingly wrought. Gary, the foreman, ran his hands through his hair, his face pale. This was an unprecedented catastrophe, a nightmare scenario he had only heard whispered about in cautionary tales. "Oh my God," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "Oh my God." Neighbors rushed forward, some shouting, some still filming, their initial dread now replaced by morbid fascination and an undeniable, collective schadenfreude. The sheer, ironic justice of the situation was too potent to ignore. The very woman who had demanded the tree's destruction was now the victim of its vengeful, unwitting demise. The sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, growing louder, signaling the arrival of emergency services. Just then, Tom Wheeler's modest sedan pulled into his driveway. He saw the gathered crowd, the flashing lights in the distance, and the unmistakable, colossal form of his beloved oak. But it wasn't standing tall. It was sprawled, broken, its vast trunk extending beyond his property line, impaling Karen's house. His quiet, calm demeanor shattered instantly. He killed the engine, got out of the car, and stared. His own expression a mixture of profound shock and a dawning, terrible understanding. His tree, Karen's house, the pieces of the puzzle, grotesque and undeniable, began to fall into place. Karen, seeing Tom, finally found her voice, a raw, piercing shriek of pure fury and indignant outrage. "You," she shrieked, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger at him from her demolished doorway, surrounded by debris. "You did this. Your tree, you owe me, you will pay for this." Her face was blotchy, tears of rage streaking her ruined makeup. She stumbled out onto her lawn, oblivious to the shattered tiles underfoot, her eyes blazing with a desperate, misplaced blame. Tom, still absorbing the enormity of the scene, simply stood there, his usual placidity replaced by a steely glint in his eyes. He didn't shout back. He didn't explain. He simply looked at the chaos, at his broken tree, and then at Karen, whose uncontrolled fury seemed to swell with every second. He noticed his next-door neighbor, a quiet man named David, a respected attorney, standing among the onlookers, his phone still recording, a grim, knowing look on his face. David met Tom's gaze, a subtle, almost imperceptible nod passing between them. The narrative of blame was already being shaped, and the truth, meticulously captured on dozens of cell phone cameras, was about to emerge from the wreckage. The fight for justice had just begun, not with a roar, but with the deafening silence of a broken home and the shattered arrogance of a self-proclaimed queen. The wail of emergency sirens grew to a crescendo, their flashing lights painting the wreck scene in stark, urgent hues of red and blue. Fire trucks, ambulances, and police cruisers converged on Willow Creek Drive, transforming the quiet suburban street into a chaotic tableau of flashing lights and concerned faces. Emergency personnel, trained for disaster, moved with practiced efficiency, securing the area, assessing the structural integrity of Karen's impaled house, and thankfully, confirming that no one had been seriously injured beyond the shock and minor scrapes. Karen, however, was a force of nature unto herself, her initial horror quickly congealing into a furious, unyielding indignation. She paced wildly on her now damaged lawn, a disheveled queen surveying her ruined kingdom, her voice rising to a shrill pitch as she alternately screamed at the bewildered tree service workers and vehemently pointed her trembling finger at Tom. "This is his fault," she shrieked, her voice cracking with fury, addressing a weary-looking police officer who was attempting to take her statement. His wretched, overgrown tree. He should have cut it down years ago. I told him, I warned him. He refused. Her perfectly coiffed hair was now askew, streaks of plaster dust marring her expensive blazer. She seemed less concerned with the structural integrity of her home than with the narrative she was desperately trying to control. A narrative that painted Tom as the negligent, culpable party. Tom, in contrast, stood calmly but firmly on his own property line, just feet away from the devastation. He watched the emergency crews, his expression a complex mixture of regret for his beloved tree and a steely resolve that belied his usual placid nature. He understood the gravity of the situation, the immense financial implications, and the legal battle that was clearly brewing. He knew Karen, and he knew her capacity for self-serving delusion. He did not engage in a shouting match. Instead, he simply waited, his gaze occasionally meeting that of David, his next-door neighbor, and more importantly, his trusted friend and an astute attorney. David, leaning casually against his own mailbox, continued to hold his phone, the red recording light still blinking, a silent, unwavering witness to Karen's escalating tirade. As Karen's accusations reached fever pitch, David finally stepped forward, a calm, authoritative presence amidst the chaos. "Officer," he said, his voice even and measured, cutting through Karen's shrill monologue, "I believe we have some evidence that might shed light on the true sequence of events here." He held up his phone, its screen displaying the footage of the tree service workers arriving, setting up, and most damningly, Karen herself standing at her window, gesturing emphatically as they began their work, a smug smile plastered across her face. He had captured the entire prelude to the disaster, from the initial arrival of the crew to the very first. Fateful cuts. The police officer, who had been struggling to make sense of Karen's contradictory statements, took the phone, his eyes widening as he watched the clear, undeniable footage. Other neighbors, emboldened by David's actions, also stepped forward, offering their own video recordings, a chorus of digital witnesses to Karen's unilateral decision. One clip clearly showed Karen arguing with the foreman, Gary, insisting he proceed despite his obvious misgivings about the tree's stability after the initial cuts. Another showed her pointing directly at specific branches, urging the workers on. The collective weight of this visual evidence was overwhelming, an irrefutable counter-narrative to Karen's increasingly desperate claims. Gary, the foreman, his face a mixture of relief and genuine dismay, approached the officer. Sir, we were told the homeowner had authorized this. Mrs. Dobson specifically told us Mr. Wheeler had given his consent. She even signed off on the work order, saying she was acting on his behalf for emergency tree removal due to public safety hazard. He gestured toward Karen, his voice tinged with frustration. We expressed concern when the tree started to lean after the first major limbs were removed from Mr. Wheeler's side. The balance was off. But she insisted we continue, saying it was an eyesore and needed to be dealt with immediately, for the good of the neighborhood. He pulled out a laminated work order from his truck, displaying Karen's unmistakable signature. The paper trail, combined with the video evidence, painted a damning picture. Karen's face, already flushed with anger, turned a ghastly shade of white. She looked from David's calm, knowing gaze to the officer's stern expression, then to the various cell phones being held up, their screens reflecting her own image, captured in moments of self-serving deception, the carefully constructed facade of her authority, her control, was crumbling around her, much like her house. That's a lie, she stammered, her voice losing its earlier conviction. He agreed. But her words rang hollow, thin and desperate in the face of such undeniable proof. Tom, finally speaking, his voice quiet but carrying surprising weight in the sudden hush, addressed the officer. Officer, that tree is on my property. It has been for over 20 years. I have meticulously maintained it, and it has never been a hazard. Mrs. Dobson has, on numerous occasions, expressed her desire to have it removed because she considered it aesthetically displeasing. I explicitly refused her requests. He paused, his gaze sweeping over the wreckage of Karen's home, then settling back on her. She had no legal right to authorize work on my property, let alone to dictate the removal of a perfectly healthy tree. The fact that she fabricated a public safety concern and forged my consent is a serious matter. The officer, a seasoned veteran, nodded slowly. He had seen countless neighborhood disputes, but rarely one with such immediate, spectacular, and self-inflicted consequences. Mrs. Dobson, he said, his voice firm, given the evidence, it appears you knowingly misrepresented the situation to the tree service company and authorized the destruction of a private property asset without consent. This could lead to serious legal ramifications, including charges of trespassing, property damage, and potentially fraud. Karen recoiled as if struck, the weight of the officer's words finally piercing through her furious denial. Her husband, who had been standing silently beside her, looking increasingly uncomfortable, now cleared his throat nervously. Karen, he mumbled, his voice barely audible. Maybe we should call our lawyer. He looked utterly bewildered, caught between his wife's escalating madness and the stark reality of the situation. He was a man accustomed to peace and order, not public spectacle and legal jeopardy. He knew his wife had a temper and a tendency to overstep, but this was beyond anything he had imagined. The revelation of Karen's deceit sent a murmur through the gathered crowd of neighbors. Some looked shocked. Others exchanged knowing glances. A few even smiled grimly. This was the comeuppance they had subconsciously been waiting for. The moment when Karen's boundless arrogance finally crashed down around her. The informal power she had wielded as HOA president. built on intimidation and manipulation, was dissolving before their eyes. The unspoken power dynamic in Willow Creek had just undergone a seismic shift. Tom, however, felt no triumph, only a deep sadness for his tree and a weary understanding of the battle that lay ahead. He knew Karen would not go down without a fight, but now he had the truth on his side, and more importantly, he had allies. He glanced at David, who gave him another subtle, reassuring nod. The legal groundwork was being laid, and the path to justice, though likely arduous, was now clear. The police continued to interview witnesses, collect statements, and secure the scene. The broken oak lay across Karen's house, a silent, powerful testament to her folly, and a stark reminder that even in the quietest suburbs, actions have profound and often ironic consequences. The sun began its slow descent, casting long, distorted shadows across the damaged landscape, a visual metaphor for the twisted truth now laid bare. The aftermath of the tree's calamitous fall plunged Willow Creek into an unprecedented legal maelstrom. Karen Dobson, initially clinging to the tattered remnants of her authority, brazenly launched a lawsuit against Tom Wheeler, demanding exorbitant compensation for the catastrophic damage to her meticulously maintained home. Her legal filing was audacious, painting Tom as a negligent homeowner whose unruly and dangerous tree had caused the disaster, completely omitting her own culpability. She believed that her social standing, her carefully cultivated image, and her sheer force of will would intimidate Tom into a swift, financially crippling settlement. But Karen had severely underestimated Tom's quiet resolve and, critically, the strategic brilliance of his next-door neighbor, David. David, a seasoned litigator with a reputation for meticulous preparation and incisive cross-examination, did not merely defend Tom, he prepared for a decisive counteroffensive. He meticulously gathered all available evidence, the dozens of cell phone videos from the stunned neighbors, Gary the foreman's damning testimony and signed work order, and even historical HOA minutes that detailed Karen's repeated, ignored demands for the tree's removal. Each piece of evidence was a brick in a formidable wall of truth that would ultimately crush Karen's fabricated narrative. David knew that in a courtroom, facts, not inflated egos, reigned supreme. The pretrial depositions were a humiliating ordeal for Karen. Under David's calm, relentless questioning, her carefully constructed lies unraveled with agonizing slowness. He played the video clips for her, frame by damning frame, showing her animated gestures, her self-satisfied smiles as the chainsaws began their work. He forced her to admit, under oath, that she had never consulted Tom, that she had misrepresented his consent, and that she had overridden Gary's professional warnings. Her indignant outbursts, her attempts to deflect blame, only served to highlight her deceit and arrogance. Karen's own legal team, accustomed to her often successful bullying tactics, found themselves increasingly discomfited by the sheer volume of irrefutable evidence against her. They had taken on a client who, it turned out, had meticulously documented her own culpability. The case quickly moved to civil court, drawing considerable local media attention. The narrative of the vengeful tree and the arrogant HOA president captivated the public. The courtroom was packed, not just with legal observers, but with curious Willow Creek residents eager to witness the unfolding drama. Tom, dressed simply in a sensible suit, sat quietly beside David, a picture of understated dignity. Karen, by contrast, arrived each day in a fresh, expensive outfit, her demeanor oscillating wildly between defiant fury and a desperate attempt at composure. During David's opening statement, he laid out the facts with chilling precision, culminating in the projection of the climactic video, the slow, terrifying tilt of the mighty oak, its majestic trunk swinging like a deadly pendulum directly into Karen's roof. The collective gasp in the courtroom was audible. David then presented Gary's signed statement, a stark counterpoint to Karen's claims. When Karen herself took the stand, her performance was a masterclass in self-destruction. She blustered, she contradicted herself, she lashed out at David, accusing him of bias. Her attempts to portray Tom as a negligent homeowner dissolved under David's methodical cross-examination, each question stripping away another layer of her pretense. When David presented the evidence of her instructing Gary to continue cutting despite his warnings, her face drained of all color, and she could only stammer incoherent denials. The jury, a diverse group of ordinary citizens, listened intently. They saw Tom, a man of quiet integrity, clearly wronged. They saw Karen, a woman blinded by her own self-importance, responsible for her own ruin. The legal battle was not just about property damage. It was about principle, about the abuse of power, and about the fundamental right to control one's own property. The verdict was swift and unequivocal. The jury found decisively in favor of Tom Wheeler. Karen Dobson's lawsuit was dismissed, and the jury awarded Tom substantial damages for the destruction of his beloved oak. Even more crushing for Karen, the court found her fully liable for the catastrophic damage to her own home, ruling that her unilateral, unauthorized, and deceitful actions were the direct cause of the disaster. The judge, in delivering his final remarks, emphasized the egregious nature of Karen's abuse of authority and the profound disrespect she had shown for her neighbor's property rights. He explicitly noted the irony of her seeking compensation for a disaster she herself had engineered through her own arrogance and dishonesty. The financial ruin for Karen was staggering. Her homeowner's insurance, upon reviewing the court's findings and the overwhelming evidence of her intentional misconduct and misrepresentation, refused to cover the damages, citing her breach of contract and fraudulent claims. The cost of rebuilding her impaled home, coupled with the legal fees and the damages owed to Tom, quickly spiraled into millions of dollars. Her once pristine, extravagant house, now a gaping, tree-ridden shell, became a constant, humiliating monument to her hubris. Her husband, who had been quietly exasperated for years, finally reached his breaking point. The financial strain, combined with the public humiliation and the irreparable damage to their reputation, proved too much. Their marriage, already fragile under the weight of Karen's domineering personality, crumbled. He left her, seeking quiet refuge from the chaos she had created. Karen, once the undisputed queen of Willow Creek, became a pariah. Her reign as HOA president ended abruptly, followed by a swift and unanimous vote to remove her from any community committees. Neighbors who had once tolerated her overbearing nature now openly shunned her. Her efforts to rebuild were hampered by her financial woes and the widespread, lingering resentment. The magnificent oak, though gone, had delivered a poetic justice far more effective than any human intervention could have achieved. Its broken form served as a constant, stark reminder of unchecked power and devastating consequences. Tom, with the court's judgment firmly in hand, chose not to immediately replant an identical oak. Instead, he decided to create a small, tranquil garden where the ancient tree had stood, a place of reflection and peace. He planted a variety of native wildflowers and a smaller, resilient sapling that would grow slowly, respectfully. He also donated a significant portion of the awarded damages to a local arboriculture society, establishing a fund for proper tree care and neighborly education, a quiet testament to the importance of respecting nature and community boundaries. Willow Creek gradually recovered its equilibrium, but not without a profound shift. The residents, having witnessed the spectacular downfall of their self-appointed empress, developed a newfound appreciation for integrity, respect, and due process. The HOA, under new, more democratic leadership, adopted stricter rules regarding property modifications and neighborhood disputes, emphasizing transparent communication and mutual agreement over unilateral decrees. Tom Wheeler remained the quiet, respected engineer. Now seen as a symbol of steadfastness and integrity, he continued his peaceful life, tending to his new garden, a man who, when provoked, had stood his ground with quiet strength and emerged victorious through the sheer force of truth. Karen Dobson, stripped of her power, her wealth, and her dignity, eventually sold her damaged property for a fraction of its worth, fleeing the neighborhood she had so desperately sought to control. She faded into obscurity, a bitter cautionary tale whispered among the quiet streets of Willow Creek, a powerful reminder that arrogance, when unchecked, can bring down even the mightiest of structures. Whether they be grand houses or inflated egos, the once towering oak, though felled, left an enduring legacy of justice, its silent, destructive act echoing through the quiet suburb as a powerful, immutable lesson in humility. This tale of Tom and Karen truly highlights the explosive consequences of arrogance and unchecked authority within our communities. What started as a simple tree dispute escalated into a dramatic collision of wills, property, and ultimately, justice. It reminds us that every action has a reaction, and sometimes, the universe has its own way of balancing the scales. Thank you for joining us on this wild ride through suburban chaos. If you were captivated by this unbelievable chain of events, please like this video, subscribe for more gripping stories, and share your thoughts in the comments below.